Hello and welcome to a very special cover story conversation. I have with me Samir Varma. He's a physicist, he's an author, he's also a hedge fund founder. But today we're going to be talking to him on a wide range of subjects. But to begin with, Samir, I think I want to congratulate you on your book, The Science of Free Will. And it's got a very catchy subtitle, How Determinism Affects Everything from the Future of AI to Traffic to Gods to Bees. So we're going to be talking about, I think, everything under the sun. But first of all, uh, can you give us a bit of an insight as to what your book is about?
Yes. So there's a little bit of a puzzle when it comes to physics. And the puzzle is if we can write down the mathematical laws that govern all of matter. So basically, you and I are made of particles. Those particles follow mathematical laws. And we know what those mathematical laws are. They're called the standard model of particle physics. And so if every particle in your body is following a mathematical law, and we know what that law is and have for 50 years at this point, how are you different than a machine? That's the question. And the second point is that if in fact you are following physical laws, then in what sense can you be said to have free will? Because, machines we don't think of as having free will. So
Right.
if machines don't have free will and you are very similar to a machine, just a much, much more complex one, what is the nature of your free will? So that's what the book is about. And it gives what I think is a satisfying answer. And the satisfying answer is that there are three completely independent conditions that make it impossible for anyone to know, including yourself, what you're going to do until you've done it.
But do I have a choice? I mean, this is the age-old argument between destiny and what is predetermined.
Yes. So it depends on what you mean by the word choice.
Hmm.
Um, is everything predetermined and is there a destiny? Yes, the physical laws say that there's such a thing must be. But the interesting thing is you cannot know what it is. And there is no the physical laws themselves tell you that you cannot know what it is, even though it is predetermined. That's the interesting thing about it. That's what's mind bending.
Explain again. I lost you a bit.
So suppose that I know the laws by which you will operate.
Hmm.
But suppose also at the same time, I cannot use those laws to figure out what you are going to do. And even you cannot use those laws to figure out what you are going to do. The gap between knowing the laws and knowing the result of the laws is in fact free will. So when you make a choice,
Hmm.
the choice you are making has to be consistent with the laws of physics, and in fact has to be consistent with whatever the great mass of particles in your body have collectively decided to do. That's what's really interesting about it. And that the physics more or less tells you it has to be that way. There's no wiggle room.
So I think I'm acting out of free will, but actually I'm following a certain pattern, only I don't know what I'm going to do. So that makes me feel the illusion of choice. Am I?
You got
No.
it. And is it an illusion or not an illusion is another question, which is a
I love this.
psychological question, right? And maybe it
Huh?
isn't an illusion. Maybe what we call free will is exactly that fact that we don't know what is going to happen, or rather what we are going to do even.
And you also make a very interesting argument in your book. Rather than free will, we have a free want. We know what we can decide something not to do rather than what we are doing. Choose that we will not do this predetermined act.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so, a silly example, and this is a very silly example, is
Hmm.
that you can't say, "Oh, I'm going to fly," and jump out of a window and then expect to fly. You can't. It's contrary to the laws of physics. So the reason it's a silly example is that everybody says, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that's obvious." But actually, it's less obvious than you might think, because the ground and the earth and the air are made of the same particles that you are, and they're following the same physical laws. So the fact that you cannot fly has to do with the exact configuration of your particles compared to the configuration of the particles around you. Because if the air were much heavier, you could fly. Much
Correct.
denser, more accurately.
There is a law of physics rather than so there goes my degree in philosophy or whatever else I may have taken, which was not physics and science, correct?
Well, it depends. Lots of philosophers are arguing about the nature of free will and have for like 2,000 years, as you well know. Um,
Hmm.
and so the purpose of the book was to ground the philosophy in the science. And then having grounded it in the science, you can then ask, well, what does this tell us about other subjects? And one of the most interesting subjects, because everyone's talking about it right now, is artificial intelligence. And it turns out
Yes.
this applies to AI very well.
Uh, Explain, go further with your thought.
So um, imagine that you have a self-driving car, which is currently one of the big obsessions of a lot of the AI people.
Hmm.
Um, and now imagine that there's a situation where the car has a terrible choice. It can either, bang into some people on the road, or it cannot bang into those people on the road and bang into a tree and hurt its occupants. Those are its only two choices. What does it choose to do? So the interesting thing is, I'm actually saying what does it choose to do, because you would expect it's programmed, but in fact, it's not programmed. What happens is that the AI learns the same way that we do. It looks at the world, it looks at lots and lots and lots and lots of examples of the world, and then creates a set of implicit rules inside its own head, whatever you want to call its head, the same as we call our own head. So we don't actually know what that AI is going to choose. So interestingly, that AI, in every sense of the word, will have free will. And so that's going to have all kinds of effects that for which we don't already know what the result is. And that's going to be
That,
the case for AI all the time.
in fact, that in a nutshell is really the biggest challenge of AI is how much do we control and how much is it going to morph and control itself?
Absolutely. And so what's going to have to happen is that we're going to have to start, I like to call it trading with the AI. So we'll give the AI things that it wants, and it'll give us back things that we want. The same way nations trade with each other when they're not fighting. And so that's going to be the only way to deal with another intelligence. Basically, directing it constantly, we can try that. It's not going to work because we don't know all the ways in which it will do things.
Hmm.
And in fact, if we already knew all the ways in which it would do things, it would be of no use to us because we could just replace it with rules. So you see, it's the exact same reason we need. I give the example in the book of the U.S. Supreme Court, just like you need an Indian Supreme Court. Someone has to make a decision on outcomes for various cases, various disputes, various whatever it is, and you don't know what they're going to decide before they decide it. If you did know what they were going to do before they decided it, you wouldn't need them in the first place. And the same argument applies to AI. If you could tell what it was going to do, then you don't need it.
So we are also, in this world where the whole conversation is going on about, in terms of how do we control AI, because we've had the whole issue of Mythos 5. We've had Donald Trump now issuing a directive against controlling AI or at least regulating certain models of AI.
Yep.
Where does that take us in terms of our own navigation, in
So
terms of
that's a superb question. And as happens frequently with the US administration, they've taken the wrong path. It is absolutely true that something like Mythos or Fable could be
table five?
jailbroken to make them tell you things that are dangerous.
Hmm.
But it's equally true that defenders have very powerful tools to defend themselves against the offensive powerful tools. And as always will happen with technology, bad guys can use it to do bad stuff. And so the good guys have to use it to stop the bad guys from doing bad stuff. Um, what always happens when a new technology comes is that people say, I don't understand it, let's ban it. That's a very standard impulse. Um, and it's generally the wrong impulse because I've studied a lot of technology transitions in history. I cannot think of a single instance in which banning the technology was a good idea. Um, Sometimes regulating it is a good idea, sometimes it's not. It depends on the regulations and depends on who's doing the regulating. But banning it is rarely a good idea.
But supposing it's gone rogue, then? as is what we were told with Micro 5.
So excellent. So there we have one huge control over the AIs that no one talks about, rather two. So the first one is that they don't pay for themselves. We pay for them. They cannot exist without us giving them the resources to exist. That's the first point. So if they go rogue, the second point is you just turn it off. Easy, pull the plug.
Can we do that? Because
Yes.
or has it now, it's now controlling itself. That's the big fear, that one day that might happen.
It can control itself. It can't control its power source. Because you see, the power source is in the physical world, not in the virtual world. And AI doesn't live in the physical world, it lives in the virtual world. So we can always turn it off. That's no problem turning it off.
So
the place where it becomes tricky is if you make it into a robot.
But then it can actually go and do physical acts.
Yes, that's where it becomes tricky, but we're not anywhere near that yet. So that's a question we'll have to deal with, as time goes on later on. And funnily enough, the science fiction stories about robots by Isaac Asimov are the best treatment of the philosophical question of what to do with sentient robots. So if people are interested, they should read those.
So then, one is, of course, switching it off, literally, or turning it off. The other is banning access to certain, model, certain
Sure.
knowledge, which is what Trump is trying to do. And that comes, what gives him the authority, and how does the rest of the world react?
So it's a very stupid thing to have done. In essentially every way, it makes the world less safe. And here is why. So let's list the states that are most dangerous to world peace. That would be North Korea, China, and Russia. And what you do
non-democracies.
Non-democracies, exactly. You got it. Which will lead me, later on in this conversation to one of my biggest irritations with India, which we can talk about. Because they are non-democracies, you don't know anything about what their decision-making is going to be, and you don't even know if it's going to be rational or sensible. And what you've done by banning an AI model is that you've given them a chance to take the lead in building AI, which is just simply stupid. Because what they're doing it very cleverly. They're basically building open source AI, i.e. anyone can download it, anyone can use it, and it's all completely free. But of course, that also means that they get to embed in that AI various things that they want embedded in it. And you don't know what's necessarily embedded in it because you can't question really an AI. And it can, of course, lie. So this is just stupid. As to when or how it will get reversed, I don't know. The right thing to do is to allow essentially the free world access to the most advanced AI, and we can all collectively defend ourselves. I mean, if we can't defend ourselves, then we're pretty stupid, and I don't think we're that dumb.
So I'm going to, you give me a good hint as to where to take the direction of this conversation, because you also have a very interesting Substack, which I've been following, where you talk about a whole lot of issues from geopolitics to growing up in India, which is where you grew up in. So just a bit about yourself, Samir, before we go on to the other questions. You grew up in India, you studied your primary schooling here, and then you went off to the US. And became a physicist, which is amazing.
And became a physicist, yeah. So I actually went to modern school in Delhi, where I graduated when I was 18. I was one of the people more fed up with socialism than almost any other Indian I know. I couldn't take it anymore. So I decided that I had to leave and go anywhere. It doesn't matter. And I ended up going to Columbia University as a foreign student in 1984. And the year I came to Columbia University as an undergraduate, by the way, it was close to unheard of for an Indian to be an undergraduate in a US university. I think there were less than 100 of us in the entire country. And many of those were children of people that had come to America with green cards, not as F1 foreign students. So I was one of a very small number that came. And I came to do computer science. I then switched from computer science to electrical engineering. And then I didn't really like engineering, so I switched for my PhD to particle physics. And then from particle physics, because the US Congress in its infinite wisdom canceled what was the most important and still would be the most important scientific experiment in the world, I decided I'd better do something else. So I went off and became a trader. Then some years later, I founded my own hedge fund, which is what I do now. And then lately, I've gone back to doing physics again because it's fun and I enjoy physics.
So you went to the US in the 80s. Why do you say you were fed up of socialism? Because by that time, India had moved out of socialism. There was, I think,
No, it didn't really, not until 1991.
91. Yeah,
And
okay, that was Indira
yeah,
Gandhi's time. Sorry, you're right. Yeah, I was
yeah,
confusing it with the
the
Rajiv Gandhi
91 is
years.
when it went out. And I have three
Yeah.
Substack pieces on this.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, because I wanted to tell the story of the three people that were responsible for India breaking out of socialism, and no one talks about them. And these three people, one of them is still alive, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, are in fact responsible for the largest decrease in poverty in the history of mankind. I mean, we should have
Correct.
statues of these men all over the world, and we don't even talk about them. So I thought, in my little way, I would put out a Substack piece, at least so the
To
history isn't going to get
quote,
lost.
well, to quote one of them, history is certainly kinder to them than the at that time the press that they faced. In fact, I have Montek's book behind me, the backstage, the one in yellow,
Oh, that's great.
which you must read. It's if you
I'd
haven't read
love
it
to. Yeah,
already.
I never got a chance to read it, but I would love to read it. He's an amazing guy.
No, he is, and you're right, because the thing is, this, of course, we were saying that India, reforms only by accident and under pressure. We don't reform really out of choice. That's how we are, and
True.
that there was that whole pressure in the 90s for us to take that step. But having said that, to the whole decision to move out of socialism and into capitalism to the India we are seeing now, because we are seeing again a reverse to the welfare model. I don't know if you've been following India. You have, I
Yes.
think, from. So how do you see this? Is it a U-turn, or we're not really? Are we heading back there? What is the model that we are following currently?
My guess and hope, and it's little more than a hope, it's closer to a guess, is that this is temporary. And I'll
Hmm.
tell you why it's temporary for two major reasons. The first is India's operating system, India OS, I call it, is 5,000 years old and is culturally the most capitalist place on earth. Nothing else culturally comes close to India's capitalism. Where in the world do you worship wealth? Goddess Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth. It does not exist. So that's the first point. And Indians have been trading with the whole world and getting rich for 5,000 years at this point. When the British came, it was the richest place on earth by far.
Hmm.
And by the way, funnily enough, it's Indians that mostly financed the takeover of India, because only Indians had the sophisticated finance necessary to fund the East India Company's takeovers. So that's another irony. That's the first point. The second point is, one of the great things about a democracy is that despite all the screaming and shouting of the current administration, you can't actually stop information flow too much. We have the internet. It is free.
Hmm.
The citizens of India look and see how the rest of the world lives. There is absolutely no way you're going to convince them again that the path to the future is for everyone to be poor so they can all be equal together. That's not going to happen. I just don't see that happening. So welfare, sure. Will there be an increase in welfare? Probably. Will there be some increases in taxes? Possibly. But is it going to stop the fact that Indians want to build for themselves better lives? I don't think so. That genie, I think, is out of the bottle. And that is a it's not fulfilling. It's a self cycle. It basically builds on itself. Once it starts, it's very difficult to stop it.
I don't know if you're following the current model, because we've been seeing it is the very rich are continuing to be very rich. They don't, government policies don't really hamper their existence so much. But it is the aspirational India that you're talking about, the middle class that is really being getting taxed. We are being seen as, in fact, to aspire to be richer is like, you have to have a guilt conscience, shouldn't you be giving to the poor? Look at the amount of cess we have, the amount of, taxes that are being levied on us. So, I mean, how do you view it from there? I mean, from here, there is a lot of undercurrent of discontent.
So stupidity, which is what that is, doesn't
Yes.
generally stop economic growth. It just slows it down. What stops economic growth is when the government basically starts to own businesses. That's the first problem.
Mm.
Or the government tells businesses in detail how they must run. That's the second problem. If you don't have those two conditions, you will get economic growth. You'll probably get decent economic growth. It's absolutely true that you can get better economic growth if you have better policy. And yes, there has been backsliding and stupidity on the policy, but that is what it is. What I like to say is that in 1991, India's policies were so abysmal that they almost beggar words. Probably the stupidest economic policies in the history of mankind. And those then have been slowly reversed. And when you go from abysmal to merely awful, which is what we have now, we have awful economic policies still in India. Just an upgrade from abysmal to awful is enough for 50 years of growth. So that's the way to
was
look
there
at
a
it.
golden period that you saw or any time in the past? What was the best time for India's economy?
Before 1750.
Not that far back. Independent India's.
The thing to understand is that the cultural knowledge of how to do business has not been lost. I mean, just think of all the great business families in India, like Marwadis, for example. They haven't forgotten how to do business. You just have to let them do it. And the nice thing is that despite all the silliness that goes on in Indian politics, it is the case that businesses in India are freer to operate today than they were, say, 35 years ago. That's the way to look at it. Now, does the middle class have aspirations and frustrations and annoyances? Of course it does. I'm not disputing that a lot of the policy is insane, but that's not the point, in a sense. I'm looking at the big macro picture. The big macro picture suggests that growth will continue. Now, how it's going to reach the common man, the middle class, the taxes, the cess, all the other stuff you talk about, good question. That requires, a good set of policies. It requires intelligent politics, which is difficult, I know. It requires parliamentarians to have a brain, which I realize is also a little bit difficult, and so on. But, as they like to say in the US Congress, which, by the way, is possibly more dysfunctional, don't look at the sausage being made, look at the sausage afterwards. So that's one of the things, is that when you're in the fray, you see the stupidity right up close. But if you sort of zoom way out, it actually looks pretty good.
So there is some pattern in the chaos, perhaps, that we'll see. I'm going to take a quick break and come back and keep the conversation going. So stay with us. Hello and welcome back to a very unusual cover story conversation. I'm in conversation with Samir Varma. He's a physicist, he's a physicist, he's a hedge fund manager and an author, but also someone who, has also writes a very popular Substack, whose views on everything from geopolitical to, I think, India, the country where he's from, are actually going viral. So, but Samir, and also on trading, but since my knowledge on trading is not very good, I'm not going to venture into that area as yet because I'll ask all the wrong questions. But on geopolitics, how do you see what's happening in West Asia? How do you see the India-Donald Trump relationship?
So India has one giant advantage that it perpetually squanders. The giant geopolitical advantage is that it is now the world's most populous country, a properly functioning democracy, and with a reasonably independent judiciary that can, if it wants to, call the government up to account. And if something really egregious happens, like that back taxes case, will in fact eventually run through the courts. The government will be ordered to behave, and it will eventually behave itself. These are giant advantages, and India does nothing at all to promote them. Nothing. The amount of money, I believe, if I last looked this up, I couldn't believe it, so maybe it's not true. I think India spends a few $100,000 a year on PR.
Well, governments do, yes.
It's absurd that they should be spending billions of dollars a year on PR. They should be lobbying all the other democracies in the world. They should have lobbyists everywhere in the world. They should be spending enormous amounts of money on explaining to the common man what India is, what Indians are, what Indian culture is, and so on. They need to explain to them that it's an open, free, functioning society, that Indians have been welcoming foreigners for 5,000 years at this point. Every religion, every culture, everything that you can possibly think of has at some time existed in India in large numbers. That we have, for example, the world's second oldest Christian community, the world's second oldest Jewish community, all in the same nation, etc. None of this is told to anybody. Nobody does any PR. It's terrible. And so the result of it is that you have complete ignorance amongst the general population about India. So in the US, for example, if you talk to the average person, they have positive views about India, but they have no way of saying why those views are positive, other than, oh yeah, a bunch of CEOs are of Indian origin. That seems pretty cool. And they don't seem to threaten anybody. So that's very happy. Great. But there's a lot more to say. So why didn't you say it? And so this is
You mean
my
market
big
and soft
frustration.
power?
Soft power, yeah. And so I wrote a Substack on India's soft power. So for example, did you know that I think it was a woman from one of the former Soviet republics, when she skated in the Olympics, she had a bindi. And she skated to an Indian music soundtrack. This is soft power. Somebody has to do something about it, and they don't do anything.
Sanam o sanam. That's right.
Yeah, drives me absolutely mad.
But in a way, some would say that is what Prime Minister Modi is trying to do, and that is what has been happening also in the past. Whether it is he's talking about yoga, he's talking about. We've seen a lot of people going on about Indian mythology, Indian homeopathy, Ayurveda. That has happened.
But you see, that doesn't affect anyone. The ordinary guy doesn't care about it. The ordinary guy cares about, are Indian movies fun? For example,
Shah Rukh Khan is the best ambassador.
For example, exactly. Send him out. Send out Virat Kohli. Send him on a world tour. I'm sure he'd be happy to do it. Send out other people that are well known in other parts of the world, so they can go and spread a little bit about the word of what the place is like. And otherwise you get this. But do people
still see us as a land of elephants and maharajas? No, I think that we moved, and snakes. We moved a long way from there.
Not really. No. Right? What has been seen is that it is growing.
It's a big market. We are being seen as a huge market.
Yes, that's a good thing. And quietly you see companies investing in India, but you don't see them doing it loudly. You see, this is the interesting thing. Every American company still thinks it needs a, quote, China strategy, unquote. Nobody says they need an India strategy, even though they have one. The gap between what they say and what they do is because India has no PR, and that's the problem, in my opinion.
Okay. In fact, we do have a lot of PR, but that's politicians spending that money on themselves rather than the country as a whole. So
yes, and I mean real PR. And real PR is not making up stuff. Real PR is actually doing stuff. So, for example, I'll give you some examples of good things India has done. The first is the open technology stack. The India stack, as it's called, the one that allows you to do transactions in UPI and all this other stuff, which they've made open source and free. That's absolutely fantastic. And that's like top quality soft power. That's wonderful. But they should, and making yoga open source so that people can't turn it into, proprietary stuff. Fantastic. But there's a lot more of that you have to do. And you have to get out there and you have to tell the story. And the PR is telling the story over and over and over again until you're sick of it, and then doing it some more. That they don't do. And that's the problem, in my opinion, again.
And now back to Donald Trump. What is Trump doing? For instance, Trump's tariffs. And what do you think went wrong between Trump and Prime Minister Modi? Though at the G7, there seems to be some kind of thawing.
I don't think any of this, honestly, is Prime Minister Modi's fault. The problem is that Trump likes people to tell Trump how great Trump is. So the more you tell Trump how great Trump is, the happier Trump will be with you. It's very simple. And if you say really nice things about Donald Trump, he'll say really nice things about you. And so the big fallout occurred because Pakistan said really nice things about Donald Trump, which evidently none of them were true, but that's beside the point. And India did not. And so now all of a sudden you've got a situation where you have your biggest opponent saying nice things about Donald Trump and you're not. India was very
Correct.
quiet, right? So that caused the problem. He doesn't like that. So what do you do about it? I don't know exactly. I mean, certainly India was not going to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, which is what the Pakistanis did. But
Right.
you still have to do something to keep on his good side. And I
Hmm.
think eventually time has come to where, they sort of got sort of some peace together, however you want to put it. But again, that's an issue of soft power, because notice that Xi Jinping is not nice to Trump.
No, he's not. And Trump is very nice
Yeah.
to him.
Yes, and the reason is that's somebody that Trump has a degree of fear about, respect, as it were. And some of that comes from the fact that China spends enormous quantities of money on PR around the world, all over Africa, for example, in Sri Lanka, for example, in Nepal, for example, in Bangladesh at this point, for example, and India does nothing.
China has got his act together economically, so which we are still, for whatever reasons, we are still not at par with China on earlier it was manufacturing, now of course it is AI and the need of the hour, or whether it is the economy.
Yes, and so one of my other frustrations with India is that it has not seemingly done very much to prepare for the age of AI. So, for example, IT shops are basically body shops, right? It's an arbitrage. You basically say, listen, equally skilled programmers are cheaper in India. Why don't you hire them in India rather than hire them in the United States or anywhere else? That is going to start to disappear. So Indian IT companies are going to need to move up the value chain. And I'm sure they're doing it, but again, they're doing it very quietly. Nobody knows that they're moving up the value chain. If they are at all, I don't even know. And I'm supposed to know these things. So it's not good again.
In fact, today we are out of time, so I'm going to just end on this note that might interest you, because I had a conversation earlier this morning where it was on the need whether India should actually have a national mission for AI, which is what one of my panelists, Mohandas Pai, suggested. And he suggested Nandan Nilekani should head it. He's the former Infosys chief. So let's hope something happens and we do, step up to the need of the hour. But so it's been an interesting conversation. I'm going to come back and get back to you on other issues also. There's a whole lot to talk about. I really want to understand Donald Trump from you, because I've been seeing some of your pieces on him. But maybe on another conversation. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.